Well, good morning, afternoon, evening, whatever time you're watching or listening. My name's Alec Seekins. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm joined by David Stockton, our senior pastor. And as always, backseat Dalton Davis. If you've noticed, Dalton is the one consistent on this podcast. He may be in the back seat, but the vehicle does not move without him. I don't think we've done a single podcast without you for years, have we?
Forgot my mic. You can't literally, I mean, you could do a podcast without me, but it wouldn't look good or sound as good or... No,
it's
I'm
true.
Just kidding. I'm
it's
just
true.
kidding.
I think now that I think about it, I think Ryan and I did hit record once on a podcast without you sometime in the last year.
Yeah, I think I was out of town or something, or it was not available. And it sounded good, so it's definitely not me.
Yeah, well,
you can do it. You're a smart guy.
It's possible, but trickier. And with this video stuff not happening.
Yep.
Well, David, you brought us through another message. We rewound and went back to the beginning of Ezekiel today because, hey, we're just tricking you into thinking we're doing like a go through a book of the Bible series. We're not doing that. We're jumping all over the Bible, hanging out in Daniel, a little Jeremiah, some Ezekiel, bouncing around a little bit.
Yep.
But we hit Ezekiel chapter 1, which is about the weirdest chapter of the Bible that you could jump into for one quick little, hey, how's it going? But I think you did a really good job of doing what I would not have been able to do, which is avoiding all the rabbit trails and flipping over all the rocks. And you just said, let's find one exhortational message and let's focus on that today, which really, if you know, that was something that you and Ryan and I were talking about for this series, that this wasn't a dig series. It was how do we live in exile? Like, let's find that. Let's get in, find how do we live in exile, and let's get out. And then we can unpack some of the other stuff here on the podcast if we want to. So
that was so the question that I've been asking. So, hey Jeremiah, how did you sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And then looking at and we did just 1 week of that with Ryan, and it was a good intro to this whole idea of the people are about to experience something very intense, something that the majority of the people didn't think could ever actually happen, happened. And then Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, those guys, they just lived such a beautiful life in the midst of those things. And we don't have, obviously, very many hours of recorded footage of their life, but we have these moments that we're told about the way that they lived out that question, how do we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And then, Ezekiel is just in the mix. He's in that same time period. He actually, was prophesying about the fall of Israel, and no one believes him, but he's convinced it's true. He was a priest, as far as we know. And he was older than Daniel. So Daniel, basically all he knew was the siege and then Babylonian captivity, where Ezekiel lived some life before captivity and then turned 30 in captivity, we know. And that was prior to the fall of Jerusalem and the temple. So he prophesied about the coming, troubles. Then he was prophesying about the troubles even in that time, all in line with Daniel and with Jeremiah, and saying, hey, this is the Lord. We don't need to resist this. This is the Lord's punishment against us. But then once the fall of Jerusalem happens, he quickly pivots and starts to prophesy the next 25 years all about the restoration that God is going to restore. And so that's a little unique to Ezekiel, how clearly he prophesies the restoration, which takes us to Ryan's message, Ezekiel 37, about the dry bones, exceedingly dry bones that not only, come back to existence, but are actually, filled with the Spirit.
Yeah. And is it Ezekiel's vision that Daniel references? Do you know off the top of your head?
I don't know.
I don't know off the top of my head either. Somebody's got Google, though.
Which vision are you talking about?
I'm on it.
I think when he says like, hey, the period of time is over, we should be heading back soon.
No, that's Jeremiah.
That's Jeremiah.
He understood, according to the prophecy of Jeremiah, how long it would be that they were in exile.
So interesting that those three guys are in conversation with each other.
Yeah, that's true. So that's the unique thing about Ezekiel is actually it's a very hopeful book, speaking about the restoration. the restoration of the temple, the restoration of the people of God in the dry bones. But it takes a long time to get there.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing that Riccio said, Dan Riccio, a couple weeks ago when we had him with us, about apocalyptic literature, right? That it is actually, weirdly enough, really hopeful. Which is funny because it's like, that's not, when you're just like flying over that stuff, that's not the vibe you're getting.
Yeah.
But if you're soaking in it, and if you're approaching it from the vantage point of people who are going through what the original audience was going through, you realize, oh, this is really hopeful.
Well, the end of Revelation is some of the most hopeful words ever penned.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the end of Ezekiel, I would say it's similar.
Yeah.
It's a little bit, I mean, it's just the imagery in Ezekiel is that sometimes totally just out there, you can't even follow. And then at other times it's just way too detailed. Mm-hmm. And it's just interesting, his mind, the way his mind worked. Because then when you get to the end of the vision of the restored temple, he's like telling you how many cubits every single thing is. And he's like following the lines and talking about the wall. You're just going, I can't keep reading this, man. Mean? Like, I don't know. You're saying it's all going to be better. I get that, but why do we have so much detail? But his mind, maybe he was, very, engineering mind, or maybe it's an artistic mind or some sort of combo.
I mean, there's definitely some creativity going on.
He had a wild mind.
Yeah,
he must have been one of those kids that's just out there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Lots of imaginary friends, stuff.
or he was perfectly normal, and the Lord just really liked messing with him. It's
I don't know.
Hey, you got to do it. But I think you're right.
I joked about that in service, that I've made fun of Ezekiel so many times that he's going to have words with me when I meet him.
Yeah. Very, very, very likely. I know you were saying just before we hit record, that you were really enjoying, and I know we talked about Ryan's message last week. But that's okay. We can go back a little bit. David missed out on that, but you were really enjoying Ryan's intro to his message about
when he was
how we know we're in a strange land.
Yeah, when he was like, when I thought of strange land, I just thought I'd write down some things that seem strange now. And he just started listing things, anywhere from now the government nonchalantly talks about aliens.
Yeah.
To I can't remember what they are, but some of them were just simple.
Something about I can't afford a nice candlelit dinner with my wife at McDonald's.
Yeah. And then, and so it was funny. He just had a list of them. And then I thought, oh yeah, there's some other ones. So I think like Waymo has got to be one of those strange land realities. I've seen them all the time, but the fact that there's just this car swirling around, no drivers.
I am such an early adopter to technology, and I will never, ever get into one of those. I won't do it.
I was really hoping you were going to say it away, Mo.
I'll put my finger under the Tesla door, like we were talking about, before I get in one of those.
That's
for sure.
Funny.
For sure. Well, it's not happening.
I would do it.
My youngest daughter told me that she rode in one.
Oh.
And I was like, wait a second, am I okay with that?
Yeah, did I give you permission?
But for her, it's just like,
get in a robot car?
No big deal. So there's a little strange land. The other thing that's super strange land is that people wear socks with sandals now as a cool thing.
Well, that all things that are not cool are cool. It's cool to not be cool.
Socks and sandals. I just can't quite, like white socks.
Yeah, the tube socks.
With sandals.
I was literally just talking about this
sandals
yesterday.
Didn't see it coming.
When you were preaching first service, I was down in the basement and I was chatting with Matt McCartan. We were talking about tube socks, and I was saying, I don't get, like, to me, when I was a kid and the transition from white socks to like no shows and black socks happened, I was like, thank you. Finally socks, and nobody can see how dirty the floor I walked around at home was in, and all these young people with their white socks, give them 6 months and they're going to see how nasty the bottom of their feet look.
Nope. They love it.
Yeah. You're right. That is a pretty strange one.
So there's some strange land stuff, but I mean, what we're talking about more and more is just how our culture seems to be more and more adverse to what we take as very simple, seemingly logical, seemingly basic understandings. Obviously gender would be kind of one of those very, very simple things where for all of human history, I mean, boy meant boy biologically and girl meant girl biologically.
Yeah.
And for that now to be something that is fluid or very rational, very smart, very, perfectly normal people are firmly convinced that it's it's a cultural construct, or it's something that isn't attached to biology. And I get there are certain cases where mentally someone is disoriented in some of that reality. But that alone obviously is a strange land component, especially for believers, because for us, we derive our construct for the Bible, for the world from a Bible, from the Bible. And so for a long time in America in particular, those basic beliefs didn't seem to cause much friction, or didn't seem to, be so offensive to popular society. But more and more, it seems like they're becoming very, very odious. Yeah. And even Chris Schoenlib, 90 years old, he was up there Sunday talking about the 40-year celebration fund, and his last little charge was just saying, "Hey, we're in I think he called it a what do you call it? A war." But what was the word? It was ideological culture war. Yeah. We're in a culture war, and the church has to figure out how to be really strong. And strong is not like strong as we flex our muscle and we dominate. Strong in the sense that we don't get washed out. Strong in the sense that we continue to have light. For whatever people might find themselves in darkness. And so I just so that's the strange land thing that we're leaning into. And so ultimately asking Ezekiel, how did you sing your song, sing the Lord's song in that strange land? And with Ezekiel in particular, so much more affliction. I mean, all of them went through horrific affliction, but Ezekiel 24, his wife dies. And so he's hit with that heaviness. And then the very next chapter, or chapter 33, right after that, he actually hears word that the temple is destroyed. And so it's like these levels of grief, these levels of heaviness that weigh in on him. And now he's left with no homeland. He's not left with a home. His home's been destroyed. And so he's feeling more of a refugee than ever before. And yet, through it all, through the whole book of Ezekiel, I think what helped him stay faithful, and the fact that we're still talking about the song he sang all these years later, was he saw a vision of the glory of God.
Yeah, I love that was the one, you had one of those messages that, which oftentimes means you did a good job, where and it was a shorter message in general, but where you talked for 20 to 30 minutes, but you probably could have got up there and said, we need to get a vision of the glory of God, and then got back down. It was clear.
That's sort of what we did. I spoke for less than 20 minutes.
Okay.
I had 20 minutes and I finished. Maybe second service was a little bit.
You deserve a gold star for a preacher to preach for less than 20 minutes.
And that was the point, was I really... I was reading through Ezekiel, and again, there's a lot of moving parts, like literally. But this one thing that kept happening was the Lord would draw his attention to this image, which was the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And he would see it. He saw it in Babylon. He saw it in Jerusalem. He saw it leave the temple. He saw it land on another hill, and then ultimately saw it come back, which was a very hopeful thing for him, that the glory of the Lord, was not destroyed. But it actually just lifted and moved, and then would go to place.
Wheels with eyeballs.
And so that was the overarching thing in the end, was I saw this was a sustaining thing for him, this vision of God's glory. So I thought, well, as I'm preparing this message, can I, in sermon form, in words that I put together, give people a vision of the glory of God? Well, first of all, that's ridiculous. Absolutely not. But can I use words that point? And so I searched the scriptures, and obviously Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of the Lord. So David, as he was looking at creation, got a vision of the glory of the Lord. And so I tried to dive into that a little bit. Isaiah, actually in the year that King Uzziah died, so a year of grief for him, he saw the Lord high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple with glory. And the whole earth was filled with his glory. So here Isaiah is recognizing in the whole earth, flowing from the temple, but flowing from heaven, the whole earth is filled with the glory, which is a hard thing to say. I mean, I was just with a guy, a friend, who's going through some physical pain, but as I was talking to him, he didn't want to talk about that. He was just telling me that he called himself a nominal Christian. And I was like, oh yeah, what does that mean? I've never heard actually someone just self-identify as a nominal Christian. And basically what he was just saying is it's just really hard for him to believe that God is good because there's so much pain in the world. And I was like, that doesn't sound like a nominal Christian. That just sounds like an honest Christian in some ways, where, we can't just look away and try and focus on, what is good, because there's so much pain, the heaviness and the pain. But Isaiah in that moment was looking at all of the grief and saying,
You mean Ezekiel?
No, Isaiah in that moment was saying, I'm looking at all this grief. King Uzziah has died. I don't know what's going to happen. The world is a horrible place. Yet I see it is also filled with the glory of the Lord. And so I think that's the challenge. And so that's where I started to go on the message was, well, how do we have a vision of the glory of the Lord, but also be honest that this world is unglorious as well. And I think ultimately that's what takes us to the cross, where God didn't ignore pain and sin and death and all of those things. He didn't just kind of try and paint over it, but he actually entered into it in fullness. And he who knew no sin became sin.
Yeah.
That verse alone is unfathomable.
Yeah.
He who knew no sin became sin, so that we, who are full of sin, become the righteousness of God.
Yeah.
And so just that, the cross is the vision of the glory of the Lord, where those things all come together, and it's glorious. Even though there's still agony in it, there's still horror in it. Ultimately, because of the resurrection, it becomes a glorious thing.
I think you're hitting on one of the most important things that I think we insufficiently understand about the gospel, which I know you eye roll for those who know me well enough, but we in Western culture, in American culture especially, we're very guilt innocence, which means that as we approach the Bible and the gospel, we're focused on the components of it that speak to guilt and innocence. And so when we tell the gospel, we say, hey, the gospel is this. We were born innocent, but then Adam and Eve ate of the fruit, and you and I have too. And so now we're guilty, and the wages of sin is death. And so there's a price that we owe. There's a guilt that we need to pay for. And Jesus came and he paid for that debt. And now we can be with him again and restored in relationship. And we gain access to that through faith. And so we talk about how the gospel deals with our guilt. And it does 100% beautifully. Everything you've heard, hopefully everything you've heard along those lines articulated about how the gospel deals with your guilt, how Jesus atones for your sin, that's also true. Yeah. But it's interesting I watched like a little clip of some progressive Christian guy that was arguing with a not progressive Christian guy that Dalton told me about. And the progressive guy was talking about, I don't know if I buy into atonement theory, And that's something you hear in kind of progressive circles. And really that response, I think, is silly, but what they're picking up on, I think what would be a more mature response is, I see more to the gospel than just dealing with guilt and innocence. And that's true, because actually the gospel deals with our shame in a really profound way that in our guilt innocence culture, it goes over our head. Yeah. And so the other way you could tell the gospel, right, is, well, we were made into a state of great honor. Glory and honor, these are interchangeable words, right? There's a lot more words that mean shame than shame, a lot more words that mean honor than honor. We were made in the image of God, in his glory, in his likeness, in a great apex state of honor. And then we did something shameful. And the result of that shame is that God distanced himself from us, because honor and shame cannot intermingle, right? And so we left and we were exiled. We were cast out of the garden, out of his presence. The same way if you had someone, in an honor shame culture, they understand this. You have a son who does something shameful, and what do? You kick him out of the family. And to us, that feels wrong, but that is a reality of shame. Shame and honor are water and oil. And so the natural response is separation. And so then there's this chasm that's created. It's the same same chasm that's created by our debt of sin.
Yeah.
It's also the response to our shame. And now we are over here apart from God, desperately clamoring to get whatever cheap honor we can get. And we get it by stepping on each other. We get it by doing, and we invert our understanding of honor and shame. And so we make shameful things. We call shameful things honorable, and we give each other cheap, fake honor by doing shameful things. A good example of that would be what people rightly talk about when they say toxic masculinity, right? When they're actually being accurate with that, the things that people believe are masculinity, like men taking from women and oppressing, like that's toxic, and that is a great example of something that is dishonorable, that certain facets of a culture, of a people can turn into honor, right? So we've spent our life and our culture doing this, and Jesus comes in and he says, no, let me debase myself. Let me humble myself. Let me become low, and let me carry your shame. And let me put that on me. And then we see even just this honor shame inversion, where as he's shamed, paraded through the streets naked, mocked, whipped, tortured, and he's lifted up on this cross. He's glorified in that as he carries our shame. Yeah. And so then because of that, we're now adopted in, we're covered by his blood, and our shame and our nakedness is covered. So all this is just saying, I could talk for hours about that, but to not spend too much time on, a key concept of the entire scripture, I think what you're hitting on is so accurate, that the cross is this crux of shame getting inverted into honor. And I think we would do so well to pay a lot more attention to words like honor and glory and shame and disgrace, and activities that surround those things, and clean, unclean. I think this is a part of what we see in the Old Testament, where God dictates what's clean and what's unclean. I think in part he's saying, this is the culture I want to build here. I want to set straight something that separates the culture of Israel from the culture of this world.
Yeah.
And so all of that, bringing back full circle to your point, we need a vision of the glory of God. Yeah. And I think in part it's because the glory that we look for is tainted, it's twisted, it's actually shame. We're so disoriented, we don't know what's glory, what's honor, and what's shame. Yeah. And so we need to look at his glory and see that.
Yeah, and that's the cross. I felt like, First or 2 Corinthians, I think it's 4, talks about, the cross being the glory of God revealed in the cross, and then the glory of God revealed in the face of Christ, which is such a cool phrase. And I think that's what happened at that cross. I mean, we only see in part,
Yeah.
But and they sing that song at the end. We'll never know how much it cost, to see my sin upon that cross. But it was something so glorious. And we recognize that, and we have a cross hanging in our sanctuary because Jesus turned something horrific into something glorious, and so he can do that in our lives. But I stopped talking right there on purpose because I knew words can only do so much, and I just sensed from the Spirit in all of our planning for this next part of the sermon series was people don't need more sermon from me. Probably rarely do. They don't even need more Bible right now. What they need is a vision of the glory of God that only the Spirit of God can give. And so we, being charismatic, believing that the Spirit is alive and well and has gifts to give his people, we decided to spend the last 20 minutes of our service, not the last 3 minutes of our service, the last 20 minutes of our service, just basically saying, okay, Holy Spirit, it's your turn.
Yeah.
And to really try and compel our people to press in, to break out of the Sunday morning structure, the Sunday morning routine, and to ask like Moses did, God, will you show me your glory? And when Moses asked that, God said yes, and he showed him all his goodness. When we, as a people, were asking that, it was cool because I had people come up to me after service and tell me something that they felt like God showed them or led them to. And so it was really neat. And we tricked people a little bit because we put communion on tables around the sanctuary instead of giving it to them so that they would have to get out of their seat and go. But that just creates like we're breaking the stiffness there. Yeah. Like people now have to create a little movement. You have to do something. There's a physical reality to the pressing in. And so people spent some time taking communion and there again, that's a vision of the glory of God. But then, with some singing in the background, just kind of let the Lord do what he wanted to do. And he showed me some cool things first service.
Yeah. Throughout the course of a few decades of following Jesus, are there moments you can look to where you feel like you've had maybe a literal vision of the glory of God, or maybe not a literal vision, but something that you will qualify as that I got to see the glory of God?
Yeah. Well, I think what Ezekiel got, I'd maybe say as a sustaining vision. So like, how was he able to endure all the hardship? How was he able to keep singing the Lord's song in such an adverse situation? Well, he had a sustaining vision, and his vision was Ezekiel 1, which we'll get into in just a second. It would have been more of a freak out vision if the Lord gave it to me, but for him it was the same.
Yeah.
And I remember right after, and I've told this story at church before, but right after my dad took his life, I remember just a heaviness settling in. When it's grief, but it didn't feel like grief. It just felt like heaviness. And I just remember being in the back of my I think my uncle was driving to the airport, and we were picking up my brother, and I was in the back seat, and I remember just saying, God, you got to give me something. And it wasn't quite the show me your glory prayer. It was just, God, I got to give you something. And in some ways I was putting myself in Ezekiel sitting by the canal. He's got the weight of captivity and slavery on him. He's grieving over the loss of friends and doesn't know what's going to happen. He feels like God's telling him, Jerusalem's going to fall. And it says he's by the river, which, a lot of times that's where I go when I'm trying, go look at a sunset or go by a river. We're in Arizona, it's hard to find rivers, but I still try and find those. And he's just kind of having a quiet time, or saying, God, you got to give me something. I'm struggling here. And it was in that moment in that back seat where what interesting, I feel like this is what my mind's eye saw, was I saw God, say to me, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and I will strengthen your heart, which is actually, there's twice it says that in the Psalms. And I had just been reading those. It was like, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and I will strengthen your heart. And then the last thing was, and I'll see you on the other side. And that last phrase was I wasn't expecting that. And it was almost as if God was saying, I'm going to go away for a little bit. But it wasn't that he was going away. It was just going to feel like he was far away. But I'll see you on the other side. And that became a sustaining vision for me when, I was tempted to run away, or when I was tempted to numb the pain, or when I was tempted to do other things. It was like, wait on the Lord, be of good courage, and he'll strengthen your heart, and he'll see me on the other side. And so, I can say, after a number of years, I don't remember exactly how many years, I had a moment where it was very clear to me that my heart was once again strong, and it was like, I just kind of smiled because, I'm on the other side.
Yeah.
I'm on the other side. So that was a sustaining vision. Yeah.
Good.
Not super glorious, not as weird as Ezekiel's, but
yeah.
They're all a little
there's
weird.
something powerful. I think to your point for what we tried to do Sunday was, there's some things you got to interact with the Lord. You got to get for the Lord.
Yep.
And it's powerful. Like my answer, I have a handful, but one of them is just this moment when you were the high school pastor, and and I was in probably 7th grade, I think. 7th grade. We were on a mission trip in Mexico, and kind of spontaneously, your cousin, who was the worship leader, pulled out his guitar on the beach and started worshiping with 2 or 3 people. And then next thing you know, half the youth group was over there, and we were having just a time of worship. And I was just nothing crazy happened, but I just encountered the weight, the glory of God in a way that I haven't before or since. I've had other different powerful encounters, but it was a unique one. And I had this vision in my mind, and it was it's a silly sounding vision, but it was like this little gauge, this little like thermometer type, the little meter type thing, and it was, like the size of, like, you think of like those old school mercury thermometers or whatever, and it was just barely over the little bottom part where it's kind of like a ball still, that just a little bit up there.
Yeah.
And that that I had the sense that was the level of of the glory of God, of the weight of God, of the presence of God that I was experiencing, and that full meter was eternity. Was the weight that we'll experience eternity. This is a vision of a thermometer, but that was so power because of the weight of what I was experiencing, because I was experiencing the kavod of God, the glory of God in a way that I knew was so dense, was so real. Another thing, after that moment, I remember realizing, like, this is an anchor for the rest of my life. Like, whatever moment in time in life, no matter what happens, however I'm feeling unsure or doubting or like, there's no way God's good, there's no way God's real. Like, I know that I can go back to this moment and I can anchor myself and say, in this moment, I was of sound mind, even though I was in 7th grade. Can't say that for a lot of 7th graders.
Never been true.
But I knew... I was so certain of the goodness and the reality of God, and that's been there been a couple moments in life where I've been like, okay, let me go back there, and let me go to the wisdom of 7th grade Alec, who knew what he encountered.
You use the word kavod or kabod. I've heard too from Hebrew, speaking about glory, and that's what Moses said. God, show me your kavod or kavod, and that glory, that word glory there in the Hebrew, meaning, substance or weight. And there was interesting because a guy came up to me after church on Sunday and said when he was saying, God, will you show me your glory? He said, I felt a lightness in that time. Like I was there, I was pressing in, and what I just felt, it was like just a lightness, and not light like a flash of light or something, no lumens, but it's the opposite of heaviness. I felt a lightness happen. And I thought that was so cool because he wasn't connecting it in what he was saying, but the idea that the glory of the Lord came and I felt lighter. So that when the heaviness of God, when the weight of God settled in on him, things didn't get heavier, they got lighter. Which is, counterintuitive in some ways, but that's what Jesus said. He said, all you who are weary and heavy laden, come to me, and I will, and take my yoke upon you. For my yoke is easy and light. So somehow when we get the weight of God on our shoulders, it causes things to get lighter. And I thought that was a perfect little glory vision connection that the Lord did with that guy. I did not do a deep dive into Ezekiel at all, but I had about an hour this morning. I did a little bit of digging around because I'm like, we're going to get into some weird stuff. I better have some sense of what I'm talking about. But one rabbit trail I went down was that word was kavod, which is spelled with a bet, which sometimes sounds like a V. So we can say kabod, kabod. Are you speaking
kavod.
Hebrew or are you transliterating?
Yeah, exactly. Because I don't know.
None of us know how to speak perfect ancient Hebrew.
I don't know how to speak perfect modern Hebrew. So, but I dug into that word a little bit, and the word picture there, which just in short, there's this thing. I'm really proud of my dad. He's the one who figured it out too. That the Hebrew alphabet, all the letters, they have these connotations. When you string them together and look at them through the lens of Scripture, you can sometimes learn something really powerful about a word by the way it's spelled. And so the word for kavod there, it's the letter of a hand, a bet, which is a house, and dalet, which is a door. So kaf is a hand. So it's the hand, the door, the house. And so sometimes what you do is you look at kind of maybe like a subroot word there, like what do these two letters mean? And there's layers, I think, that are really cool to this spelling as I'm trying to wrap my head around it this morning. But essentially, one layer to the meaning, one way you could put the word picture together would be to say, it's the hand on the door to the house, which again means weight and it means glory, right? So if you're like opening a door and there's no hand on there, the door is light, it's easy, and you just open it. But if you're trying to open a door and there's a hand on the other side pushing against it, now all of a sudden this door is somehow mysteriously heavy and weighty. And I think I smell a connection to the temple there, obviously, because I think that word kavod is really big there. It's like I envision like the hand of God on the temple, on the door to the temple, on the weight or the hand of God lifting up the door to the ark. Like there's this glory that's there. And does that mysterious weight that you can't see on the other side of the door, is it there, or has it departed and gone to Babylon?
That's very interesting. I've been thinking about the hand of the Lord.
Yeah.
Recently, and this is in my own just kind of thoughts and musings. But, so there was clearly the hand of the Lord was on Israel, which was a blessing.
Yeah.
And then the hand of the Lord, actually the glory of the Lord departs. And that's, he sees that in a vision. It's actually the glory of the Lord departs. And then he sees inside the temple. And the reason was because there was a lot of idolatry.
Yeah.
So the hand of the Lord was on Israel. And then the hand of the Lord lifts off Israel, and Babylon is able to wipe them out. But when the hand of the Lord is on Israel, no one's able to wipe them out.
Yeah.
Hand of the Lord's off Israel, the enemy comes in like a flood.
The word curse, which I don't remember because it was just at half hour this month. The word curse is lightness. So to curse is there's no weight, there's no glory, there's no heavy.
So what I've been thinking about our country, it seems clear that the hand of the Lord has been upon the United States of America in some real unique ways. And I'm not saying we're better than anybody else, but it does seem like
blessing.
There are certain moments, like the Revolutionary War. There are moments where it seems like the hand of God was bringing about a certain result. And again, we have to be careful that doesn't mean, manifest destiny or American exceptionalism.
Being blessed by the Lord does not mean you're inerrant.
But I've been saying, Lord, where is your hand right now? And I feel this in my bones. I feel like the hand of the Lord is lifting off of our country. And we'll get into this a little bit more on Sunday, maybe some of the reasons why. But it just seems like there's a bit of that happening right now in this. I could be wrong. Don't quote me. Don't sell stocks or anything because of this. But that's what my prayer life is right now. Like, Lord, what are you doing? And how do we make sure your hand is upon us? Because your hand, even though it can feel heavy sometimes, really brings light. Yeah. Really brings glory, really brings what we long for. So that's interesting. I hadn't put those two things together, but that word picture, again, is so fascinating.
The other thing in that word picture, right, so the second two letters, Bet Dalet, they spell multiple words because Hebrew doesn't have vowels. But one of those words is like something that's alone or separated. So it's the hand on it's the hand on what's been separated. And again, I go to the garden and I think of, the exile and the separation. And is there this, like, we have been, what we talked about, the kind of that honor shame gospel, right? Like, we have been separated from God in shame. But the glory is when the hand is over that, when the hand of God is on those of us who've been separated. What's interesting, weird little, I don't know if there's something here, but just side note, since we're doing the podcast, right? Yeah. Another word that's spelled with those two letters is linen, which my mind just goes to the linen ephod, and I'm like, is there an interesting connection there? Like the hand, is there something about the hand of God on the ephod, on the priest, on their connection? I don't know about that, but that was interesting.
In Ezekiel, in the temple, the priests are only allowed to wear linen. Yeah. They're not allowed to wear wool or anything.
Yeah. So is the hand of God on the priests or not?
Well, I think in Ezekiel, the hand of the Lord lifted off of the priests because of idolatry. But in the end, the restoration, the hope that the priests would be on track again. Yeah. And so again, though, we'll get into some of that next week.
Yeah, and since we're deep
that.
diving, another word that's spelled the same way as kavod, I don't know how it's pronounced because the vowels are a little different, but is the word for like Pharaoh hardened his heart. So I think in that sense, it's like the hand is on the door to the house and you're not getting in. Yeah. So I don't know. It's just something I don't know. I don't have thoughts to chew on that right now, but if you're listening to the podcast, you're probably like chewing on thoughts. So there's something
my
to chew
mind's
on.
spinning on that. I'll be chewing on that too. Cause that's what it feels like when the Lord's hand lifts. It's like the devil the enemy can rush in, and you see that in Babylon where the hand actually showed up. Actually, just the fingers came and wrote on the wall. You've been weighed in the balance, found wanting, and so when the hand showed up, it was almost as if God was saying, "My hand has been on you, Babylonians, to bring you to this place, But now you've been weighed in the balance of unwanting. I'm pulling my hand, and the Medo-Persians are coming into.
Yeah.
It's like, I've been protecting you.
Yeah.
But you haven't done what I've asked you to do, so the enemy comes flooding in.
We're definitely playing with a major biblical theme here. You know, and like I called my dad and was asking him about this this morning too, and he was saying, yeah, like when you when you make a sacrifice, you have to put your hand on the sheep. You're putting your weight, you're putting your glory, and you're putting the weight of your sin on that sacrifice. You know, and then I thought of too, like the weird thing in Genesis where was Abraham blesses one of his sons and he's like, hey, put your hand under my thigh. And you're like, that's just, but I wonder if there's a connection of like put your hand under here and you're putting your hand under me. My weight is on you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know, really interesting stuff, but we would be remiss if we didn't spend at least a little bit talking about the weirdness. Do you have any thoughts on the weirdness, the detail, other than what we've already hit
in Ezekiel?
In Ezekiel 1.
Yeah. Or just in chapter 1.
Going back to where
because, I mean, I think the weirdness
faces,
of
the wings, the lightning, the fire.
Yeah. And it's not weird biblically, because you see this imagery in Daniel and in Revelation to some extent, and, you know, the different faces of the living creatures. And I think they all just, you know, in some ways, I don't know exactly what they mean, but I think they kind of represent the fullness of creation, you know, where you have the face of the birds, you have the face of the animal or the beasts, you have the face of man, and you know, so I think there could be something to that. And I know people have done a lot of work in that, even connecting him with Jesus, and the 4 gospels each represent one of the faces. And I think there's connections there, but I mean, for Ezekiel, I mean, I think they were just, you know, what God was giving Ezekiel is a vision of that there's more than just what he's seeing. So he's living in a slave camp, and he's seeing the devastation of his homeland and the absolute awesome, mighty power of Babylon. Yeah. In its heyday. So that's what he's seeing. But then it's like the curtain opens. God opens up the curtain and says, "Hey, that's just your little tiny perspective. Let me show you what else is happening." And he sees this, you know, awe-inspiring, unable to communicate clearly what this is. But again, and what I said on Sunday is like, don't focus on the high and mighty rims. Yeah. I thought that was such a sweet, you know, rap song beginning right there. But then it kept raising your eyes to the one who had the appearance of man. And the top half was, you know, kind of this like gleaming pure metal, and the bottom half was just pure fire is what it talks about. And second service, I unpacked that a little bit, where I think that speaks of Jesus in the sense that he walked such a horrific road, you know, and those feet like burnished bronze, like he walked through suffering and was refined through that. But then the that's the humanity part of him, but the divinity part of him is just this pure, you know, like not refined by fire, but actual pure fire. You know, there's something I think even speaking about Jesus. But yes, at the same time, you know, especially in our day and age today, people want to talk about aliens, and it's just this really cool spaceship, and never seen a spaceship, you know, quite like that, with wheels and eyes within the wheels, and and the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Yeah, that was an interesting. I mean, I felt like what was really helpful to me, which is usually helpful when you're super lost and confused, is Bible Project have a video. Yeah. Because they really do a great job of picking up on some of the major themes and simplifying. And really, when you read all those details, almost what's helpful enough simply is to see a graphic, right? Which they have. If anybody's lost and confused on Ezekiel 1, Bible Project's first video on the book Ezekiel was helpful for me. Because you get a graphic. You get, what does this actually look like? Somebody sat down, read it, and drew it. And essentially what you're left with is something that looks like a cart that's carrying around the presence of God, that's carrying around God. Yeah. And which is a very, like, they carried the Ark of the Covenant, you know, on very poles, on an ark, all these type of things. Yep. And
and so and you have like, which makes sense then, where you hear about this fire and lightning going around, and that in my mind I was reading that as evoking, Exodus a little bit, and the pillar of fire and the lightning and all this stuff. And so you're getting some of that imagery, and so the point of it all is exactly what you said. Like, all this paints a picture of the glory of God moving around, the glory, the presence, the weight, the kavod of God, and it's got wheels, and it's floating around. And why those wheels have eyes, I don't know.
Wheels and wings.
But they got wheels, they got wings, they're moving around. I thought it was interesting that this, if we're gonna spend a little bit talking about spiritual beings and stuff, this thought that you have these four living creatures, and it is just a random thought I had that was curious, but here we have an example of a creature that inhabits what appears to be at least two forms with one spirit. Which,
what are the two forms?
So the living creatures, but the spirit of the living creature is also in their wheel. And it says the spirit of the creature was in the wheel too.
You don't
and
think it's a Cybertruck?
Yeah, could be. Sounds an awful lot like something Elon Musk would come up with, But I have no idea what that means. But it's just, I think, if anything, it's just indicative to me that there is a spiritual realm, and things are operating differently. Yeah. But things are operating in a real way. And who knows how much of that is metaphor, how much of that is like Ezekiel tapping into actually what things look like, or manifestation,
or the future things. I mean, that's the fun thing is, some of these, like in Revelation, John is describing these scorpions flying around and somehow stinging everybody. And then, you fast forward 2,000 years, and if you were to try and use first century language and understanding to describe, an Apache helicopter, like what would you say? Well, it looked kind of like a scorpion, and somehow it was stinging everybody, so that's the other play in all of this is, now, and I'm not saying that's what John was seeing at that point. But I think we have enough years of history and technology and things to where it is fascinating to think along those lines. Like, was he seeing into our day and age? And I think, even if he is, it's probably not that important. Yeah. But it is fun to think about. And I mean, there's a total craze on the UFO reality. Yeah. I was just hearing someone talk about, in Hinduism, they have 7 realms or whatever, which the whole realms thing is not, I mean, in the Bible, it talks about the third heaven. And I mean, I think it's talking a little bit more about, there's sky, then there's space, and then there's heaven or whatever
stuff.
Yeah, right. So I think there's a lot of play in that. But what this guy was trying to say was he thinks all these UFOs that are appearing are these spiritual beings, and he was putting it in a Hinduist context. And within Hinduism, there's these caste levels. There's kind of these hierarchies, and so there's a density level. So when the density increases, then they drop to a lower level or something. Like, he was describing it like that. And I mean, I just thought, that seems weird. And why would these beings look like they look? I have no idea how connected, but for him, that's what he was doing. But it made me start to think just how, in Christianity, we have 2 realms. Yeah. We basically have the natural realm, which is really like our empirical senses experience the natural realm. But then there is the spiritual realm. And in the spiritual realm, there are things that, don't really get perceived empirically. Yeah. And we believe in both. And the trick, though, is 2 things, because I was like, well, the thing that's real different about Christianity is God doesn't dwell in the spiritual realm. God dwells in both realms. I mean, God is fully present in both realms, whereas most other religions would say there's a separation. And then I started to think, well, but that we sort of dwell in both realms. which is a trip. But when you read the scriptures, we are already seated with Christ in the heavenly realm. We've already been blessed with every spiritual blessing in the heavenly realm. Ephesians talks about. And so somehow we inhabit both realms. Now we're very much more aware of the natural realm.
And that's probably maybe part of the exile, like if you track Tim Mackey Bible Project, they talk about the idea of Eden as this place like the New Jerusalem where these two realms are really fully overlapped and interlinking. And so being exiled from the garden and not yet in the New Jerusalem, it's like, well, we're made for both worlds, but we've been kind of kicked out of one a little bit, but also kind of restored to it a little bit as Jesus.
Well, and I think we're so wired to understand one that we just give all the weight to that one. But then I was thinking about spiritual beings. So spiritual beings inhabit the spiritual realm, but then we see in scriptures that from time to time they show up in the natural realm. So in some ways they're created for both as well. There's just like a primary, and we're created for both. There's just a primary. I don't know. So my mind was just kind of going down these things, especially in regards to all the visions that Daniel saw and Ezekiel saw. So I've been just kind of...
You got even a donkey who can see the spiritual realm in the Bible too.
I've been trying to process how all of that works. And we know that in the spiritual realm, down is up and up is down in some ways. We know in the kingdom of heaven, the first is last and the last is first. So there is new goggles that you need to put on for all these things. But yeah, so I think Ezekiel's just got some wild stuff, and I think we can glean from it. But again, like I said, with Daniel's apocalyptic vision, it's like don't get too stuck looking at what the person in the vision is not supposed to be looking at. And that's what it says in Ezekiel chapter 1. He sees all of these living creatures and all this stuff. And then it says, and then I looked up above that and in this expanse, and he sees what basically is a throne encapsulated by rainbows of light. And then he said, and then I looked onto the throne and I saw one. So like we have to keep following where the messenger is telling us to follow. And ultimately the focus was on this one of human appearance. I mean, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
So our focus is always just supposed to be on Jesus, who 2 Corinthians tells us the glory of the Lord is in the face of Christ. So that's where it's just, we took communion, we just sang songs about Jesus, we just closed our eyes and fixed our gaze on the one. Even one of the songs, ends with, my gaze transfixed on Christ alone. Or whatever. I thought it was awesome, man.
And if we're looking at this strange world and being hit with a sober reality that I don't know what's glory or what's shame. Like if we look back on our life and you think of other moments of 7th grade Alec, other moments of you younger, and you realize what a fool that I thought this was glorious, but now that I'm older and now that I'm more mature, and now that I've maybe hopefully drawn a little closer to the Lord, I realize how shameful that was.
Yeah.
Which how many of us? I mean, is there a person alive? Probably only the most ignorant among us could look back on their life and not see a moment that they thought they were doing something honorable and glorious, but it was in fact really shameful. But as we look and we say, man, but am I still that? Am I still so disoriented that I don't know what's up and what's down, and I don't know what's honor and what's shame? If we're trying to get realigned, readjusted, right perspective, well, then we ought to just stare into the glory of God for which we were made, in whose image we were made. If we stare at his glory, to your point, the whole message, the whole podcast could be get a vision of the glory of God. And there you go. Yeah. Then we move out from that saying, well, that's what God's glory looks like. And so that's glory. And anything apart from that is shame. Yeah. And I'm going to live my life trying to move towards that glory and live in alignment with that glory and live worthy of that glory, even though the only reason I have that glory is not because of anything I've done that's made me worthy, but because of what Jesus did that covers me.
Well, and that's the whole thing with the All for One that we're trying to do with the 4 churches, Central Corridor, trying to do something beautiful against the backdrop of election year.
Yeah.
And not even to say election's bad or whatever, but there's a lot of noise, and there's a lot of not beautiful stuff being said and done, all these things. And And so we thought, well, why don't we try and just do something beautiful? Jesus is beautiful, so let's focus on him and lift his name up. Humility is beautiful, so let's get on our knees and pray all together. And then unity is beautiful, so let's love one another. And so trying to do something, trying to put a vision in front of our eyes, to put a vision in front of our city of something beautiful that they can look at, and there they'll see Jesus. So in some ways, it's our work, our labor, our voices, our song, our actions. They become that which builds an altar, that which builds this thing for Jesus to sit enthroned upon. Yeah. It actually says that he's enthroned upon the praises of his people. And so I think in some ways that's what Ezekiel was seeing was there's something that is, there's these living creatures that are lifting up the one who is worthy, and so we need to continue to be people who lift up the one who is worthy. Whether we're in exile, whether we're feeling like, we got this on lock, or what it is. And I know a lot of people had a very strong reaction to the conviction, the 34 counts of guilt towards Donald Trump in the New York court. And I heard one person just saying that they're like, no matter what, no matter if you hate Trump or love Trump, this is still a sad day, because it's either sad day for America because now we have a president who's a convicted felon, or a former president is a convicted felon, or it's sad because you feel like this is a mistrial or an unjust trial, or either way, there's just a bunch of sadness. And then I think there's that third party that's just kind of going, I don't know. I mean, yes, if he's guilty, then in some ways he should be convicted. But, it seems like there's been a lot of other guilty individuals who have not been convicted. So that's a mess. And then is it a mistrial or not? I don't know. It's hard for me to believe that everything's above board and everything's clean there. So there's like three different parties, right? Like one's bummed for this reason, one's bummed for this reason, one's just bummed.
But is there any camp in their right mind who isn't feeling like, oh, this is a shame?
Yeah.
Like, to your point, right? Because even if you're like, he's guilty, well, I'm American.
Yeah.
And he was my president for 4 years.
Yeah.
So, and shame is sticky.
Yeah.
And so that's shameful for you and for me. If he's guilty, it's shameful for you and for me. If it was mistrial, if it's all of the above, that is a reality.
Yeah.
But
no matter what, how bummed you might feel for whatever reason you might feel, at the end of the day, we need a vision of the glory of God. Yeah. We need to lift up the one who is worthy. And there's only one who is worthy.
Yeah.
And again, we play our part as U.S. citizens. I mean, I fully intend to vote. I fully intend to take in as much information as I can and make my best, guess as to who I think would be best for our country, and who I think will make the best, policies that help me and my family be able to live according to the values that we hold and believe. And I have no problem doing that. But if I let that become the most important thing, or if I'm trying to lift up a political candidate, especially with the two front runners we have now, I mean, there's no lifting that up.
Yeah.
You don't have the strength to lift that up, because I mean, at this point, it just seems like there's tons of corruption and
it's in Revelation. It's not the votes of the saints that are sweet incense to the Lord.
Yeah.
It's the prayers.
And that's where we got to, continue to whether we get to a time where the land is so strange that it becomes slavery and destruction for followers of Christ, or whether the land is just strange because they're wearing tube socks with sandals or whatever. Our job remains the same.
Yeah.
Our face set like flint. Actually, another vision that somebody had was he saw Jesus in multiple different scenes, but the scenes weren't important. It was like his eyes, and every single one of his eyes, there was just like, he didn't describe them as fire. That's the way the New Testament or the Bible writers describe it. He said they were so resolute, they were so focused, they were locked in. And I think that's, as followers of Christ, we need to become resolute, focused, and locked in on what is important and what matters, and never be distracted. I mean, the world's trying to distract us. The world's trying to draw us into all these other things. And again, I'm not saying don't vote. I'm not saying don't be. We have politics is life. It's the water we swim in, and so we do engage in that. We do, but just like Tim Keller said, we avoid simplicity.
Yeah,
because these are complex issues, and we avoid complacency. You can't just avoid this stuff.
Yeah,
people are too important, and it is important who has the power and what they do with it. But we also we make sure it doesn't, we avoid primacy, political primacy, because it's not the most important thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Tim Kelly, he's just awesome.
And to that point, and to your point earlier of like, where is the hand of the Lord? And if the hand of the Lord is, in some sense, whatever that means, lifting from this nation, from this people, from this culture, from this place, well, we know the presence of the Lord goes where it's invited.
Yeah.
And it's, so if we're thinking, and I think a lot of us, we see something of the blessing departing, we see some of the glory departing, and maybe we don't know that it's the glory of the Lord or whatever, and we're trying to struggle to get it back. And I don't think we get the kavod of the Lord by voting in the right people.
Right.
Which again is important, is good, is whatever. And I don't think we get it by the right initiatives and the right policies. I think all those are good and important, and we should engage in those, hopefully in alignment with where the Spirit of God is leading us.
Yeah.
But the way that we get the glory to come back is we invite the Spirit, and we do justice. We love mercy. We walk humbly with our God. We let our prayers rise as sweet incense to the Lord. We lift Him up.
Yeah.
And the things you were talking about, prayer, unity, and what was the third one? You just, with the all for one, I just said it a second.
Humility.
And humility, yeah. We do those things, and those are going to invite the hand and the weight and the glory and the kavod of God on this nation again.
Yes. And right now, we got September 18th.
Yep.
At Phoenix Bible Church, and then I've been talking with the city. We're trying to go to Steele Indian Park on November 6th, which is the day after the election, Super Tuesday. And we're going to do November 6th in the park, in the city. We're going to do everything we can in our collective strength to bring the weight of God into our city, no matter what happens on election day. That's not the point. Yeah. We're going to try and do. I'm so excited, and I feel like there's going to be so much adversity to it or whatever, but right now the city's given us the green light to be able to do it.
Amen.
And I think it's going to be right where we need to be at that moment in time. And we've built towards it, which is cool. Lord knows what He's doing.
That feels like a good place to wrap up with that call to come together in unity and seek the glory of the Lord, get a vision of His glory.
And wherever you are, school, work, home, you can usher in.
Yeah.
The glory of the Lord. It is there.
Yeah.
And you can bring it to bear. You can't control it like some sort of genie or whatever, but you can bring it into your own heart and your life. Lord, bring your glory. Lord, show me your glory. And you can share in it and bring it to bear in this world. And that's a little bit of what we're called to do as Christians. That's what Jesus did.
Well, David, thanks for being a good pastor and a lover of the glory of God. And thanks for listening, for watching, for hanging with us.
Thanks, Stockton.
It really means a lot that you guys are hanging with us. We said this a few times, but we would be doing this just to nerd out. But the fact that we're finding more and more people wanting to hang, wanting to listen, wanting to dig a little bit deeper, that it's not just me and David and Ryan and whoever, and of course always faithful Dalton. But thanks for doing that, and we love you guys. Like, subscribe, all those things that you're supposed to do.
Share, comment,
emoji, all those things, and we'll see you guys next week.